Hi, everybody. So I'm back and I'm going to be doing another song review this morning. Um, Today I'm going to be talking about a Barbra Streisand song called You Wanna Bet, which was recorded in the 1960s. There are certain songs in an artist's catalog that become enormous hits and define an era. And then there are hidden gems, the songs that may not have received much attention when they were released, but which became fascinating once you discover the story behind them. Barbra Streisand's You Wanna Bet is one of those songs. Today, Barbra Streisand is one of the most celebrated entertainers in American history. She has successfully become a singer, an actress, a director, and a producer. But in 1966, she was still a relatively young star whose career was developing at remarkable speed. And You Wanna Bet gives us a snapshot of Barbara at a particularly interesting moment, right in the middle of her transition from Broadway sensation to major recording artist and Hollywood star. And something especially interesting about the song You Wanna Bet, it wasn't originally written specifically for Barbra Streisand. The song was written by two giants of American musical theater, composer Cy Coleman and lyricist Dorothy Fields. Coleman and Fields had collaborated on the Broadway musical Sweet Charity, which premiered in 1966. The musical was inspired by Federico Fellini's 1957 film Nights of Caribbean and centered on Charity Hope Valentine, a dance hall hostess searching for love. Cy Coleman was already an important figure in American popular music. Dorothy Fields had an extraordinary career as a lyricist dating all the way back to the 1920s. She had worked with composers including Jerome Kern, Irving Berlin, and later Cy Coleman. So when these two collaborated on Sweet Charity, they were bringing decades of experience to the project. There's something fascinating about the connection between the Broadway musical and Barbara's recording. Barbara recorded two songs from Sweet Charity score in 1966, Where Am I Going and You Wanna Bet. Columbia Records released them together as a single, with Where Am I Going as the A side and You Wanna Bet as the B side. The record was released in early 1966, and Billboard Records showed that the single entered the Hot 100 on February 19th, 1966. It spent 2 weeks on the chart and peaked at number 94. Now, if you only looked at the chart position, number 94 might not sound particularly impressive, but that's exactly why this recording is so interesting. Barbra Streisand was recording material connected to one of the major Broadway productions of the year, while simultaneously establishing herself as one of the most distinctive singers of her generation. And You Wouldn't Bet itself has a fascinating theatrical history. The song is actually based on the title song from Sweet Charity. Dorothy Fields rewrote the lyric for Streisand's recording, transforming it into a different presentation. In the stage musical, the number was associated with the character Oscar, who sang it to Charity. That means when you're listening to Barbara's recording, you're hearing something that is connected directly to the Broadway world of 1966, but you're not necessarily hearing the exact same version that audiences experienced on stage. And that's one of the things that makes Barbra Streisand's early recordings so compelling. Barbara wasn't simply reproducing songs. She had a remarkable ability to take theatrical material and make it sound like a personal statement. Listen to the attitude contained in the very title, You Wanna Bet. There's a challenge in those words. It's playful, but it's also a compliment. It's almost as though she's saying, you think you know what I'm going to do. You think you know how this is going to turn out. Well, you want to bet. That wasn't, that kind of personality was perfect for Streisand. By 1966, she had already become famous for bringing an unusually strong personality to her performances. She wasn't the kind of singer who disappeared behind a song. She inhabited the material. And here we see why a relatively obscure B-side can still be worth talking about decades later. You Want to Bet is only about 2.5 minutes long, but it represents a fascinating intersection of Broadway, popular music, and the rapidly developing career of Barbra Streisand. There's another remarkable part of the story. For many years, the song was difficult to find. Unlike many of Streisand's more famous recordings, You Want to Bet did not appear on any of her regular studio albums. For years, it was essentially a 7-inch vinyl rarity. Fans who wanted to hear it had to track down the original single. Then, in 1991, thank you, Barbara, Barbara released Just for the Record, an enormous career-spanning collection documenting different periods of her career. And finally, You Want to Bet was made available to a much larger audience. It appeared among the collection's recordings from her early career, giving longtime fans and newer listeners a chance to hear the forgotten piece of Barbara's 1960s history. Think about that for a moment. A song recorded in 1966 essentially spent a quarter of a century as a relatively obscure piece of Streisand's catalog before receiving a much wider release in 1991. And that tells us something important about music history. An artist's legacy isn't made up only of the songs everybody knows. Sometimes the most revealing recordings are the ones that didn't become hits. The huge songs tell us what the public embraced. The obscure songs tell us what an artist was experimenting with, what kinds of material interested them, and what musical worlds they were moving through. And You Want to Bet captures Barbra Streisand at important crossroads. She was still closely connected to Broadway. She was becoming a major recording artist. Hollywood was increasingly interested in her, and within a few years, she would become internationally famous through films such as Funny Girl, earning the Academy Award for Best Actress for her portrayal of Fanny Brice. But before all that fully happened, there was Barbara in 1966, young, theatrical, ambitious, distinctive, and already unmistakably herself. And here we see why discovering an obscure recording can be almost like opening a time capsule. You Want to Bet isn't one of Barbra Streisand's biggest hits. It doesn't have the cultural footprint of People, The Way We Were, Evergreen, or Woman in Love, but that's precisely what makes it so special. It's a little piece of the journey. A song written by Cy Coleman and Dorothy Fields. A song connected to Sweet Charity, a 1966 Streisand single that barely touched the Billboard Hot 100. A recording that disappeared from easy access for decades. And eventually a rediscovered piece of history preserved on Just for the Record. Sometimes the musical treasures aren't the songs that everyone remembers. Sometimes they're the songs waiting for someone to remember them. And You Want to Bet is one of those little treasures in the remarkable history of Barbra Streisand. So thank you so much for listening to me talk about You Want to Bet by Barbra Streisand. I hope you enjoyed this song review, and I do plan to do some more song reviews too soon, as well as album reviews. So stay tuned for all that, and I'll see you next time, everyone. Bye bye.